Fire Emblem. This iconic tactical role-playing game series pioneered an entire echelon of new gameplay mechanics. What originally started off on a Nintendo Entertainment System spiraled off into a widely respected gaming franchise. However, how did it get there? How did the Fire Emblem series get to the position it's in today? To the 8-bit era in Shadow Dragon to today's gameplay in Fire Emblem Awakening? Well, to explain that, we will have to discuss the evolution of Fire Emblem. However, before we get into the absurd armor variations found throughout the game series, let's begin with the game that started it all. Fire Emblem, Shadow Dragons, and Blade of Light. What led to the inception of this revolutionary title is when the creator of Fire Emblem, Shozu Kaga, along with Intelligent Systems, initially wanted to develop a simulation game. The result is Fire Emblem. The game is widely respected to be one of the first games that pioneered the tactical role-playing genre and turn-based strategy in console gaming. Game mechanics such as different classes of allies and enemies, stats, movement range, and managing your army has pretty much exploded the minds of neckbeards at the time. In essence, the gameplay philosophy of the original game is rather simple. All the characters in the screen is unique with their own classes and stats. Every individual unit can level up to earn better stats. Each side also moves at alternate turns to achieve whatever objective is present and to attack opposing characters. The trick is to place characters with stat or class advantages to key positions in the map to achieve certain objectives. Needless to say, the gameplay is actually very engaging when real tactical thought is placed into it. But that's not all. A really neat mechanic has set the Fire Emblem series apart from most other role-playing games, which is the inclusion of permanent death. For example, let's say if one of your paladins gets killed in a line of duty. In the game, he actually does die and he's out of play for the rest of the game. Now hold up, this particular mechanic may seem a bit harsh in today's time. However, I actually really like this design. In my perspective, it brings the game to life and gets the player that much more immersed in the game. Not only does a player have to keep a winning strategy in mind, but he also has to learn to minimize casualties while micromanaging his army to bring out the maximum efficiency for his performance. And wow, that was a mouthful. Anyways, now since we discussed Fire Emblem 1's gameplay, let's discuss a bit about the story of Fire Emblem in a spoiler-free section. In Fire Emblem 1, the story of Henri the Great is told, whom slayed the Shadow Dragon known as Medius. The story then revolves around Prince Marth of Altea, whom is a descendant of Henri. However, the Shadow Dragon Medius still holds a grudge with the kingdom of Altea, so he is resurrected and later invades Marth's home country, killing Marth's father, the King Cornelius, in the process. To win back his kingdom, Prince Marth must gather an army and obtain the legendary sword known as the Falchion, along with a Fire Emblem to wield the blade. Once this is done, Prince Marth will lead a military campaign to regain his lost kingdom. So now that we discussed the first Fire Emblem's plot, I do want to talk briefly regarding the storylines of the other Fire Emblem games, since there are a bunch of people out there whom are confused in how the games fit in with each other's plot, myself included. In actuality, many of the stories found within the Fire Emblem game series are completely independent of each other. For example, Fire Emblem games revolving around the Prince Marth timeline ranges from Shadow Dragon and to the latest game in the series, Fire Emblem Awakening, while the games revolving around Eliwood and Roy, such as the Binding Blade and Sword of Flame, takes place in an entirely separate universe. Same principle goes for the games revolving Ike, and of course my personal favorite game in the franchise, the Sacred Stones. Now before we get too carried away, let's move on to the second game in the series, Fire Emblem Gaiden. In terms of gameplay, a few changes were made that had a lasting impact in the series. For example, certain classes featured selectable branching promotion trees and offers an overworld map to travel, in addition with having a battery RAM save feature and some new icon selections for weapons and items. The story revolves around Alm and Celica in the continent of Valentia. Now before I get a bunch of questions about how this game fits into the seemingly complicated Fire Emblem storyline, it's actually very simple. The land of Valentia, where Gaiden takes place, is near the continent of Archenea, where the story of Marth takes place. However, this game should really be considered independent in terms of story. Anyways, without making this sound too elaborate, Alm and Celica are lifelong friends whom have aspirations to bring peace to Valentia and ultimately unify the continent. By the time Fire Emblem Awakening comes around, the continent of Valentia is renamed to the continent of Valm, after the hero Alm. Same goes for the continent that tells of Prince Marth's story, which is the land of Archenea, which is later named Elis in Fire Emblem Awakening. Wow, come to think of it, figuring out the Fire Emblem storyline is a bit troublesome to find out at first. but hopefully this video helps out newcomers to the series. Moving on to the third game in the franchise, Mystery of the Emblem is in all actuality a remake and extension of the first game. However, new gameplay innovations were made, such as a dismounting command. For example, cavalier units can be dismounted to fight on foot. On the flip side, however, these same cavalier units can only use a sword while on foot. Furthermore, in chapters that take place in interior locations, both cavalier and airborne units are forced to dismount. In addition, this is the first game that implemented an overlay tile movement system, where you can see how far a character can travel as opposed to just wandering about with a cursor like a madman in prior games. Also, an interesting note about Mystery of the Emblem is that it was actually adapted into a two-part anime series, which is actually pretty good but kind of cheesy at times.
No.
Now, up to this point, the Fire Emblem series has been more or less stagnant when it came towards pushing new gameplay innovations. But everything changed when the Fire Emblem Genealogy: The Holy War was released. This is the game that first introduced the almighty weapon triangle. For newcomers of the series, the best way to describe the weapon triangle is like rock, paper, scissors. For example, swords beat axes, axes beat lances, and lances beat swords. Same goes for the Trinity of Magic. But that's not all, folks. The game is actually split into two parts, between Generation 1 and Generation 2. The neat thing about this split is that a relationship and children system has been added. For example, two characters in the first half of the game can have children that appear in the second half of the game. The child in turn will inherit stats from their parents, giving the player some control over stat manipulation, kind of similar to the breeding system in the Pokemon series. In addition, Genealogy of the Holy War is the first game to introduce a special skill system, where characters may gain certain skills or perks that may be commanded on the field or randomly, depending on the skill. These particular mechanics became a staple in future Fire Emblem games. Every game since has introduced the same weapon triangle system, and a skill system has been adopted in most Fire Emblem games afterwards. Moving on to the glorious plot of the game, you play as Sigurd of Chalfie as you're attempting to ward off the Grand Vale Empire. The story takes place in the continent of Jugdral, which is in the same world as in Marth's storyline. However, this story takes place thousands of years before Marth's time. Anyway, Sigurd ends up meeting this girl named Deirdre, and hopefully I pronounced that name right. Anyway, she is a member of the Grand Valiant royal family. They end up having a kid named Seliph, and in the second half of the game, he forms a liberation army to oppose the Empire. Now, before we talk about the next game in the series, it should be noted that both Genealogy of the Holy War and Thracia 776 takes place in the same setting. The next game of the series is noted to be a sequel or a companion piece to the Genealogy of the Holy War. The game Fire Emblem Thracia 776 is a very interesting iteration in the Fire Emblem series. Not only is it the game containing the most difficult to pronounce names, but this title just so happens to be one of my favorite games in the series. Also, there is something rather important about Thracia 776. Thracia 776 is actually the last Fire Emblem game created by Shozu Kaga, whom is the creator of the Fire Emblem series. In my opinion, he went out with a bang with this one. For example, let's take a look at the gameplay. Thracia does take after Genealogy in most aspects. However, this game does have its own unique flair. Specifically, this is the only game in the series that features a fatigue system. Whenever a character participates in an action, they gain points of fatigue. When these fatigue points exceed the HP for a given character, then they cannot participate in the next chapter. This mechanic, along with a permanent death system, really set the game apart of being one of the more tactical savvy games in the series. Not only do you have to keep your troops from harm's way, but you have to think about their limitations as well. And if that's not enough for you, then this game is the first in the series that introduced the rescue command, where one character is allowed to pick up and carry another character from harm's way, granted if the character is light enough to do so. Other neat mechanics this game introduced is Fog of War, where the player can only see part of the map if their characters are near the vicinity and use torches. In addition, a capture command mechanic where characters can capture enemy units and seize their equipment has been implemented. Now that we have talked about the gameplay, let's move on to the story. Thracia 776 takes place in the same storyline as in the Genealogy of the Holy War. You play as Lief, the son of the fallen Prince Quan of Leonister in the middle of the Great War dealing with the Kingdom of Thracia. As a result, Lief is seeking to restore his lost kingdom. Now, I do want to make special note about this game since I believe Thracia 776 is the most underrated game in the series. But looking at what the game has to offer really pushed the limits of the Super Nintendo at the time, and the game should really be applauded for that. Now that we covered all the Fire Emblem games of old, this is where things get really interesting. Enter the Fire Emblem The Binding Blade. This game is the first one to make it on the Game Boy Advance. It is also the first game in the series that featured the most familiar form of the support system. The support system as we know today is initiated when 2 or more units spend a certain amount of time together in battle. The result is an increase in their support level. Once this is done, these units gain a stat improvement when near each other. This game in particular took most of everything in the past games and presented it in a neat package. Also, this game does feature our boy Roy. A neat note about this game is that Super Smash Bros. Melee featured Roy to help sell Binding Blade in Japan. In fact, it was during the early 2000 time frame that Western audiences really got a taste for Fire Emblem. Now, I'm really excited to talk about this next game, which in my perspective is one of the best games in the series, Fire Emblem the Sword of Flame. Guys, this game is the epitome of what Fire Emblem is all about. This game took all the prior games' pioneering mechanics and presented it to near perfection. All 44 playable units available in the game have diverse and different classes and stats, along with expanding their own roles. This game is also the first to introduce weapons that reverse the weapon triangle. Also, both the Binding Blade and Sword of Flames have some really neat animations. But really where this game really pulls the player in is the story. The story is so good I don't even want to elaborate on it too much for fear in spoiling anything. But this game takes place in the continent of Elibe, which spans both games. Sword of Flames is a prequel to the Binding Blade, so you get to play as Roy's father Eliwood. Seriously, I just can't get over how good this game is really. If you have a Wii U, buy it off the Virtual Console, it is worth every penny. Moving on to the final Game Boy Advance Fire Emblem game, we go on to the Sacred Stones. This game just so happens to be my personal favorite game in the franchise. The main reason for this is the amount of freedom the game gives you. In prior Fire Emblem games, you are given a set path of levels with little to no choice to decide which battles you want to fight in. In Sacred Stones, a map system is implemented where you can decide which battles you want to participate in. So in that regard, Sacred Stones borrowed the overworld map idea from its predecessor, Fire Emblem Gaiden. Most critics argue that this makes the game easier since you can just max out all of your unit's stats by just engaging in battle after battle, but I believe this mechanic just further immerses the player in the gameplay. For example, there are a few things in this world that matches the sensation of building up someone who is seemingly the weakest being on the face of the planet and turn that unit into an OP Chuck Norris unit. Needless to say, the satisfaction of spending time with your units and building them up to be ever more powerful is one of the better things about the Fire Emblem system. Moving on to the plot, Sacred Stones takes place in the continent of Magvel, with Prince Ephraim and Princess Erica as the main protagonists. The story is okay and pretty routine when it comes to the story of most Fire Emblem games. For example, an evil kingdom invades another kingdom and you have to liberate your homeland, and I think I just spoiled 90% of all Fire Emblem games when I just said that. Anyways, we like Ike. Moving on to the Ike timeline of the Fire Emblem games, we start off with Fire Emblem Path of Radiance. Taking place in the land of Crimea, no, not that Crimea, you get to play as a young mercenary Ike, as you are being pulled into a war dealing with the kingdoms inside the continent of Tellius. Path of Radiance is the first game to provide 3D graphics, in addition with voice acting, but the voice acting is certainly interesting.
Ike, look! Up there!
Don't leave! Don't leave me! Father!
Also, previous Fire Emblem mechanics are expanded upon with new classes and new weapon designations. What really set this game apart is what the new class of characters such as the Laguz Changelings, which are humanoid beings that can transform to certain beasts. A really neat thing about this game is that you can forge your own weapons and manage your army through a base. Also, a partner system has been added where you can direct friendly allies to certain locations, but you cannot directly control them. All in all, I thoroughly enjoyed Path of Radiance. Moving on to the Ike timeline, we go to Fire Emblem Radiant Dawn, which is a sequel to Path of Radiance. Interestingly enough, if you have a save file of Path of Radiance on your GameCube memory card, you can transfer data to Radiant Dawn, which does lead to some stat improvements when it comes to certain characters in the game. The game expands upon the support system and introduces an elevation advantage, where characters in higher ground will have stat advantages from aggressors in lower ground, which is a pretty nice feature if I do say so myself. In addition, human units can be promoted twice and become third tier OP units. Also, weapons have been expanded upon with greater variety. Now here we are, Fire Emblem Awakening, the game that currently is on the top of the Fire Emblem Foundation and has pushed the idea of Fire Emblem to brand new audiences. To many fans new to the Fire Emblem series, this is the first game they played. While I agree, this game is hands down one of the best in the series, keep in mind where this game came from. Towards getting its gameplay foundation from Shadow Dragon, getting the idea for a customizable avatar from the remake of Mystery of the Emblem, exploring in the overworld map where both Gaiden and Sacred Stone laid the foundation for, expanding with a support system such as in Radiant Dawn, and even the marriage and children system originating in Fire Emblem Genealogy: The Holy War, along with the weapon triangle. Fire Emblem Awakening is the paragon from where all the prior games of the series has led up to this point. However, Awakening does have its own pioneering. This is the first game in the series that introduced DLC. In addition, it also further expanded upon the support system with the inclusion of Dual Strike and Dual Guard, where two supporting units are adjacent to each other, may strike enemies together or defend against enemies. In addition, this game was in fact supposed to be the last Fire Emblem game in the series. Due to the declining sales of the franchise, things looked grim, but this fear acted as a catalyst that pushed Intelligent Systems to make Fire Emblem Awakening nothing short of spectacular. As a result, this game became the highest selling Fire Emblem game in the series, with over 1 million copies sold. Fire Emblem Awakening features a story of Chrom, Robin, and a mysterious masked man in the former land of Archanea, which is now called Elis. Now, where does Fire Emblem go after this? What is next for the franchise? Shin Megami Tensei Cross Fire Emblem has been announced in January of 2013. Not much information about the game has been revealed, but Intelligent Systems has noted that it's still in development. Regardless of that game, one thing is for certain: Fire Emblem is going to continue to evolve, and it's going to continue to push innovations. Fire Emblem, this iconic tactical role-playing game series, pioneered an entire echelon of new gameplay mechanics. What originally started off in the Nintendo Entertainment System spiraled off into a widely respected gaming franchise. However, thanks to Intelligent Systems, the series has indeed evolved. The Fire Emblem series got to the position it's in today thanks to its dedicated staff. To the 8-bit era in Shadow Dragon to today's gameplay in Fire Emblem Awakening, the evolution of Fire Emblem is quite interesting to say the least. Needless to say, I wonder where Fire Emblem will evolve into next. Well then, I hope you enjoyed this video and the first episode of this channel's new series. Also, special thanks goes to Visual Uprising for developing this really neat new channel art. Link to his website is in the description. Also, who is your favorite Fire Emblem character? Mine is Ashnard from Fire Emblem Path of Radiance. I just love how he wants to kill everyone. Anyways, this is the first episode of my Evolution series. For the next episode, I'm going to give you guys a decision on which video you would like to see. Comment below on which video I should do next. The evolution of Pokemon or the evolution of Metroid. Comment below on which one you would like to see. The next evolution video will be released on January 12th. If you enjoyed this video, then like, and if you really enjoyed this video, then please subscribe, since it really does help me out. Anyways, stay frosty, and here is the video of the day.
Hey guys, Kitty here. I really hope you enjoyed this video. Click the link to see a video about Star Fox Wii U. If you don't want to click it, then enjoy this dancing math.